My name is Riley Monroe, and I've been a pilot in the Navy for over a decade. You wouldn't know it if you saw me at one of our family barbecues. Especially that one sweltering summer in Texas, the smell of grilled ribs thick in the air and sweat clinging to every inch of skin, when my Uncle Sam lifted his beer and said, "Here's to Riley, our family's queen of flight simulators." Laughter broke out across the patio, loud and careless. My cousin Zach doubled down, adding, "At least she hasn't crashed the Xbox yet." I smiled, the kind you force when your pride's taken a direct hit, but there's nowhere to put it. I let the smile freeze on my face. I didn't say anything, just kept sipping my lemonade and staring past the fire pit where the kids were chasing each other through the dust. Everyone knew me as the quiet one. I wasn't the loud Marine with medals on his chest, or the one telling war stories like they were action movies. I was the niece who showed up in uniform but never talked about what that uniform meant. Maybe they thought I worked in logistics, or did office paperwork somewhere safe. Maybe that made it easier to joke. The truth? I've flown missions that most of them couldn't imagine. Missions that didn't show up in photo albums or group chats. Zach was thinking about his high score. I was thinking about the hydraulic leak I'd managed over the North Atlantic, in zero visibility, with 4 souls on board who weren't me. You don't just blurt that out at a backyard cookout while someone's flipping burgers and your aunt's yelling about who stole the last deviled egg. Growing up, I used to think silence was strength. That staying quiet made me more mature, more grounded. But that summer, sitting on a plastic folding chair in the middle of my family, I realized silence just made it easier for them to pretend I wasn't worth listening to. They loved Zach's gym stories and Uncle Sam's tales from Fallujah. I could recite half of those stories myself by now. I'd heard them so many times. No one asked what I did last deployment. No one cared where I'd been stationed or why I had to take a call from my commander halfway through dessert. To them, I was polite. Easygoing Riley. Always there. Never in the way. Not the kind of woman who flew into storms or brought men home under fire. That was fine. Or at least, that's what I used to tell myself. But that night, as the laughter echoed against the barn walls and the moon hung low like it was listening, something shifted. I felt it in my chest. A quiet decision settling like dust. The next time they chose to be blind, I would make them see. Not with anger, with truth. I grew up in a family where service was a birthright and noise was a badge of honor. My earliest memories were of camouflage gear drying on the clothesline and boots lined up by the door like trophies. Every Thanksgiving, someone brought home a new story about combat or command, and I learned early to listen more than speak. My dad served in the Navy, just like his brother Sam. My cousins followed close behind, especially Zach, who started lifting weights before he hit high school and never stopped talking about how the gym builds warriors. I was the outlier, the girl, the one who built paper planes while the boys shot airsoft guns in the backyard. I loved engines and sky charts, but no one ever asked why. When I enlisted, the family was supportive in the way people are when they don't expect much from you. There were smiles and proud claps on the back, but beneath that, I could feel it. They thought I was playing at something, like joining the Navy was just a phase I'd outgrow before I settled down and got serious. Even after my first deployment, they still treated me like the kid who used to help set the table and stay out of the way. I earned my flight wings at 25, right after 2 years of pushing myself harder than I ever had. No one from my family came to the pinning ceremony. Zach had a training event. Sam sent a text that said, "Proud of you, kiddo." It was the same thing he said when I got my driver's license. That day, I told myself it didn't matter. But it did. The ache still does. Every family gathering after that felt like a rerun. Zach would walk in, and the room would tilt toward him. They'd talk about his new fitness program, his growing client list, and his upcoming Spartan race. My uncle would beam. My aunt would brag. And me? I was the quiet one in the corner, drinking soda and answering the same questions over and over. Still flying? That must be so scary. Do you get airsick? They knew my uniform, but not the hours I'd spent flying into war zones. Not the times I'd held the radio steady while everything around me was falling apart. Not the times I'd walked off a mission, numb and trembling, and still had to smile through a family dinner that same weekend. No one ever asked. Not really. And I stopped trying to explain. I chose to let them be wrong. At some point, I became a background character in my own story. The one who shows up, looks the part, but never speaks the truth. I watched as Zach got praised for showing discipline by skipping dessert, while I said nothing about the missions I'd led, the lives I'd helped save, or the nights I didn't sleep because the silence in my head was too loud. Part of me wanted to believe they just didn't know, that if they understood, they'd treat me differently. But the truth is, they didn't want to know. They liked the version of me that kept things simple, polite, easy to ignore. I tried for years to convince myself that their attention didn't matter, that I didn't need their validation. But there's a different kind of ache that comes when your own family looks right through you. Not because you've failed, but because they decided long ago that you couldn't possibly be someone worth seeing. The cockpit was lit only by red glow and blinking instruments as I flew low over northern Syria. My hands were steady on the throttle, but my heart raced with each mile I covered. The mission was supposed to be clean, in and out, but clean rarely happened in combat zones. The call came through like a crack of thunder. Mayday, Mayday. Team Charlie pinned, requesting air support. Ghost Falcon, do you copy? My call sign echoed through the headset, cutting through the static. I answered immediately. Copy. Ghost Falcon inbound. Hold position. There was no room for hesitation. Not when lives were on the line. Below me, heat signatures moved through a crumbling village. I could see the outlines of friendlies hunkered down near a half-collapsed building, flashes of gunfire lighting the dark. The F-35 roared over the hills, and I adjusted the angle, heart pounding as I locked onto the enemy positions closing in on them. Talk to me, Ghost, the radio crackled again. We're taking heavy fire. I could hear the panic in the SEAL's voice, but I kept mine even. Target acquired. You've got air cover. I released 2 precision-guided missiles. The impact turned the night bright for a second, followed by radio silence. Then a breathless voice. Direct hit. We're moving. Thank you. I didn't answer right away. I was still circling, making sure no one was left behind. One of the SEALs had been hit. They were dragging him out through the dust. Every second felt like a lifetime. Ghost Falcon, we're clear. That's when I let out the breath I didn't know I'd been holding. On the way back to base, I couldn't stop shaking. Not from fear, from the sheer weight of what almost happened. I didn't know the names of the men I'd just saved, just their voices. But they knew mine, or at least the one that mattered up there. Ghost Falcon. And that night, it saved them. 2 weeks after the mission, I was called into my CO's office for what I thought was a routine debrief. He didn't say much at first, just handed me a report with redacted lines and satellite timestamps I recognized. Then he looked at me and said, "You know who you pulled out that night, right?" I shook my head. He tapped a photo clipped inside the folder. It was Colonel Sam Monroe, my uncle. I stared at it for a long time, the edges of the page blurring. "He knows it was you," my CO added. "He's known since the day after, told command to keep it quiet." I left the office in silence, my boots heavy on the hallway floor. Everything inside me burned, not because he hadn't said thank you, because he had chosen not to. He had sat across from me at dinner 3 nights after I saved his team, laughing at Zach's jokes, pretending I was still the polite niece who didn't matter. He had made a choice to protect a version of himself that didn't owe his life to the quiet one in the family. I wasn't angry yet, just stunned. Shock has a way of making you feel like you're floating outside your own skin, but deep down, something broke. The story I had been telling myself for years that maybe they didn't know, maybe they just needed time, was a lie. Sam knew, and he stayed silent anyway. The sun was brutal that afternoon, clinging to every inch of my uniform like a dare. The backyard was filled with familiar faces, the same red plastic cups, the same smell of overcooked ribs and cheap beer. I hadn't been home in over a year, but nothing had changed except me. Zach stood near the grill, beer in hand, surrounded by a circle of cousins and neighbors. He caught sight of me and raised his voice. "Well, look who's back. How's the flight simulator treating you, Captain Monroe?" Laughter rolled through the group like it always did. Predictable, lazy. I clenched my jaw and smiled. Not because it was funny, but because the silence I was holding felt like a fully armed missile. The worst part wasn't Zach's joke. It was that no one blinked. Not even Uncle Sam, sitting 5 feet away, sipping from his cup like he hadn't once clung to life, while I flew cover fire over a Syrian village. They looked at me like they always had. The polite one, the niece who never caused trouble, who wore her uniform well but probably never saw much action. They didn't know. They didn't care to know. And Sam? He said nothing. I could feel the heat rise behind my ears, the kind that doesn't come from the weather. I didn't need to say anything. I just needed the right trigger. My hands stayed loose at my sides, but inside, I was already scanning for a way to end this. Not with anger, with truth. Every laugh Zach earned that day pushed a little deeper. I watched him flex in posture, playing the part of a soldier without the scars. The applause came easily to him. For me, it had to be earned in silence, under fire. And for now, that silence was still holding. But it wouldn't be for much longer. The beer was flowing, the grill smoked on, and Zach was deep into another story. Holding court by the grill. He had been talking about discipline for 5 straight minutes. So the guy tells me it was Ghost Falcon. Hell of a pilot. Some legend, Zach said, raising his voice for effect. Probably some grizzled old dude with one eye, right, Dad? Bet he's seen some action. He then gestured to me with his beer, a dismissive flick of the wrist. Not like our Riley here, polishing the simulators. The backyard went silent, not because of Zach's joke, but because of Sam's face. It had gone ashen white. He stopped breathing. "Zach," Sam said, his voice dangerously low. "Shut up." Zach froze, the smile sliding off his face. "What?" "It was just a joke, Dad," I said. Sam repeated, his voice cracking. "Shut up." He turned to me, and for the first time, I saw something other than dismissal in his eyes. I saw shame. The silence that followed was instant. It was a shockwave. Someone dropped a cup. All eyes, all of them, snapped to me. Zach just stared, his mouth open, like his brain couldn't catch up. "Wait. What?" he muttered, confused and defensive. Sam's voice was hollow as he spoke the words he had held hostage for a year. "That pilot? Ghost Falcon." It was her. The air thickened. You could hear the wind shift in the trees. Zach's face paled. His lips barely moved. "I'm sorry." I nodded once, my voice steady. "It's fine." But everyone knew it wasn't. No one laughed after that. The music faded into the background noise. Even the kids stopped running. That was the moment the room finally saw me. Not as the quiet niece or the background pilot, but as Ghost Falcon, the one who flew through fire and came home without asking for applause. Later that night, the fire pit burned low, and most of the guests had gone. I found Sam alone on the porch, a half-empty beer in his hand, his eyes lost somewhere in the dark. He didn't look surprised when I sat down beside him, just defeated. He let out a slow, painful breath. "You shouldn't have had to wait this long to hear it from me." I didn't say anything at first. The silence between us wasn't new. But this time it felt heavier, like it carried all the things we hadn't said for years. "I knew it was you," he finally admitted, not looking at me. "The second we landed, I heard your voice on the radio, clear as a bell. I signed the report that kept your call sign classified, and you said nothing," I stated. He let out a slow, painful breath. "When I got back, Zach was all, 'Dad, you're a hero.' Everyone was. I just, how could I stand there and say it? How could I tell them that the hero was hiding in a ditch, praying? And the one who pulled us out wasn't some grizzled warrior. That it was you? My niece. The quiet one I joked about. So you let them laugh at me, I said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a fact. It was easier, he whispered, his voice cracking with shame. It was easier than admitting the truth. That the queen of flight simulators was a better soldier than I was that night. I was a coward, Riley. Not in Syria, but here, in my own backyard. I saved your life, Sam, I said, soft but firm. And then, I sat at your table, while you let your son laugh at me like I was nothing. My voice didn't shake, but inside, something finally let go. You shouldn't have waited so long. He nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping. You're right. I thought I was doing the honorable thing by protecting Zach's image. But I see now, I was just doing the easy one for myself. He didn't try to explain more. He didn't have to. The truth was already between us, laid bare. We sat like that for a while, the cicadas buzzing in the trees, the smoke from the fire curling into the night. Then he said quietly, I'm proud of you, Riley. I always have been. I just didn't know how to say it without breaking something else. I looked at him. Not angry. Not bitter anymore. Just tired. Next time, say it anyway. Let something else break. He smiled faintly, and for the first time in years, it felt real. We didn't hug. We didn't make a speech. But something settled between us. Not forgiveness exactly. Just understanding. And for now, that was enough. The sun hit the tarmac hard that morning, bouncing off the polished rows of boots and brass like firelight. My name echoed through the hangar, and I stepped forward, heart pounding beneath the uniform I'd worn through storms no one else had seen. This time, the mission wasn't classified. The room knew exactly why I was there. As I walked toward the stage, a hush settled over the crowd. I spotted familiar faces, pilots, commanders, ground crew, but one stood out. Sam. In full dress uniform, standing tall, hand raised in salute. I froze for a second. Not from nerves, but from something deeper. That gesture. From him. It wasn't just respect for my rank. It was a surrender of his pride. I returned the salute, steady and sure. Then, slowly, one by one, other veterans followed. Men who had once outranked me. Some who'd never met me. They bowed their heads, lifted their hands, offered me what I had never asked for, but always carried the weight of not having. Recognition. The medal itself was heavy, but it wasn't the thing that made my chest tighten. It was seeing my uncle among them, not as a superior or a shadow over my name, but as part of the line that honored me. My voice cracked when I said thank you, not because I was overwhelmed, but because something inside finally exhaled. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't someone's niece. I was Ghost Falcon. And the whole base saw me. The backyard was quieter this time. No loud toasts, no clinking bottles, just the soft rustle of leaves and kids playing tag across the grass. Sam walked over with a small wooden box in his hand, his step slower now, but steady. He opened it without a word and pulled out the challenge coin. The one they'd given me after the Syria mission. The one with Ghost Falcon engraved in worn metal. I've held on to this too long. It belongs with the next one, who'll understand what it means to stand for something, he said quietly. Then he turned and knelt beside his grandson. The boy's eyes lit up as the coin dropped into his palm, cool and bright in the sunlight. Sam looked at me. I stepped closer, rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. Let him keep it, I said softly. Let him remember who stood up when others stayed silent. The moment didn't need a ceremony, just a quiet nod, a shared glance, and the hope that maybe this boy, growing up in a world shaped by our choices, would carry more than a coin. He'd carry the story, not of war, but of courage without noise, of truth spoken when it matters. That day, in the soft gold of evening, the weight I'd carried for years finally passed on, not as a burden, but as something brighter, something earned. The road curved along the coast, windows down, wind tangled in my hair. I drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting near the coin that now lived in the console. Not for nostalgia, but as a quiet reminder. The ocean beside me rolled steadily, like time catching its breath. I used to think battles were only fought in the air or on foreign soil. Turns out, some of the hardest ones are fought in our own homes, with silence, with swallowed words, with the ache of wanting to be seen. But I'm not silent anymore. I found my voice, not to shout over others, but to stand where I once disappeared. And maybe that's the real victory. Not the medals, not the salutes, but the moment you stop asking for permission to matter. So now I wonder, who's waiting to hear the truth? Only you can speak. And more importantly, what's stopping you from saying it?